think you're watching the stream there, Chris.
Yeah, sorry, what were you saying? Oh, is there
I think you're watching the stream there, Chris.
I am, so I should turn that off. I was curious if I should be playing that or not at the same time.
You can pop out the chat if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's exactly it. All right. So sorry everyone who's watching this. Let me how do I pop the chat out here?
It's somewhere there on the top right, above the chat on the YouTube page. Anyway, hi everybody, welcome to YEGRB, the October edition. I'm going to pop Chris out for a second just to quickly introduce the stream. Andy is here as well, but he's just listening in the background, so he will be in the chat to interact with everybody. He won't be on camera today. So, do one of these. So welcome again to the October Ruby Meetup. Your hosts, as usual, are Andy Stachician and me, Kelsey Gabriel. As I said, Andy is just kind of hanging out in the weeds this month. We do have a website. If anyone's unfamiliar with it, if you're here for the first time, come check us out on YEGRB.com. We've got all of our events listed there. We've got all of our videos. We've got a few extra resources. If you're just learning Ruby, some great links for how to learn. And there's a contact form there as well. If you've got any feedback you'd like to share with us, please do. We are happy to hear anything that anyone has to say to improve the meetup or to improve the Edmonton Ruby community for all of you. We are part of the Dev Edmonton Society and the Dev Edmonton Slack. If you want to join that, if you're not on it already, go to yegrb.com/slack and see us on the Meetup-Ruby channel. Normally, our meetups are taking place at the Mercer building at Startup Edmonton. And because of being involved with Startup Edmonton and the Dev Edmonton Society, Startup Edmonton has a code of conduct that they want everyone who's involved with any of their events to follow. But basically what it boils down to is be excellent to each other. We want everyone to feel welcome. And the best way to do that is to be welcoming and friendly and set a good example for your fellow meetup attendees. That also does extend, by the way, to the YouTube chat. So a bit of introduction to our talk today. We've got a feature presentation by Chris Cumming. He has talked to us before, and he's come back to talk to us a little bit about Sorbet, which is a type checking, I believe, tool for Ruby. Of course, anyone who's familiar with the way that Ruby normally works, it's a kind of weakly typed language. And Sorbet introduces a little bit more structure into your typing. He's going to tell us a little bit more about that. We got some news. We got Minecraft Steve coming to. Sorry, that's the wrong. That is the wrong slide. Ruby 2.7.2 is out as of a couple of days ago, and this is just a small release. I believe mostly security. There was a vulnerability in WebRick, so the dependency that Ruby brings in for that has been updated. And for some reason, they've taken out the deprecation wordings for 2.7.2 and onward up to Ruby 3. Ruby 3 Preview 1 is also out, so you can start playing with that right away. That brings with it I believe, I can't remember what it's called, the RBS type annotation support, and a few other interesting features. So take a look at that if you're interested of preparing yourself for the incoming release of Ruby 3. I believe, again, a Christmas present this year. Also, Hacktoberfest has started. I know that there's been a bit of a disaster this year with the spam PRs, but if you haven't ever participated in Hacktoberfest before, there's a Hacktoberfest channel on the Dev Edmonton Slack. Anyone there would be happy to help you make your first PRs, or if you've if you participated before, this is a year definitely that needs a lot of assistance in making sure that repositories that are participating have the supports to deal with those spam submissions and make sure that people are able to still enjoy Hacktoberfest. And also, busy month. Edmonton Startup Week is October 19th to 23rd. You can look at the schedule for what events you can do virtually this year on edmontonstartupweek.com. Finally, we're going to do quick introductions. Anyone who wants to answer these questions in the chat, to introduce yourself to everybody else who's come, that's awesome. So my name is Kelsey Gabriel, and the question I'd like to ask this week is, what other programming or tech-related groups, meetups, or communities do you attend? So I am personally involved with a lot of the Dev Edmonton ones, but one that I want to talk about in particular that should be starting up again pretty soon is the Dev Books Meetup, which is a book club that talks about, one book at a time. The last book that we did was Pragmatic Programmer, which is a fantastic read. And the next one's going to be about, I believe, about refactoring a Martin Fowler book. And if you go to the Dev Edmonton Slack, which you can find on yegrb.com/Slack if you're not in it already, go to dev-books, and that should be starting fairly soon. So get in there. You got some time yet to get the book and start reading if you want. So I'm going to bring Chris in here to answer these questions as well. Chris, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm not muted or anything?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I'm glad everyone can hear me. Hi, my name is Chris, and I'll be doing the talk today. So the question was, what other tech groups, meetups do I belong to? I also belong to one called, why can't I think of the name right now? It's called, Legacy Code Rocks. So that's where I got the idea for where I do the Dev Edmonton weekly chat. So if you ever participate in that Dev Edmonton chat, I stole that idea from them. So, and I guess that's kind of the other group it's not really a group, I guess, is every Tuesday at noon, we have a Dev Edmonton just chat, just basically sit down, have chat like we're, back in the days when you could have coffee with people. So we'll sit down, just have coffee, chat about whatever software topics come to people's minds. So again, go to, join the Dev Edmonton Slack, and you'll find the event posted there every Tuesday is where you can find a link to that.
Perfect. Is there a particular channel that they can look at for that?
No, we don't have a chat channel. Probably the best is just go to the events channel. There's an automated reminder that'll pop up every Tuesday morning. You can also go to meetup.com and you can subscribe to the meetup there. That's how we've been getting some new users, or I guess new members to the chat. So
perfect, cool. And Mark has answered in chat. He's talking about the Hacktoberfest channel, which is a place you can join. A lot of people are looking for help this year. Obviously, Hacktoberfest seems to have exploded in a great way and in a not so great way. So any assistance that you can give, I'm sure would be greatly appreciated. And also, there's a survey. Mark's looking at starting a sticker swap, so that's pretty cool. So Andy, who's normally up here talking with us, is talking about the mobile developers group. That's also part of the Dev Edmonton Society. They've got their own meetup channel in there as well. Cool. So I believe that is it for now. Oh, we do have a quick mention here of job opportunities. If anyone has anything else they know about, please say so in chat. But there is one currently at Vertical City. It's been going on for a few weeks now, but I believe they're interviewing now. And you can apply still on LinkedIn if you're interested in that. They are a Ruby shop, and they do in elevator marketing. So they've got those screens. They've got information for, I believe, mostly the residential sector right now, and ads. So that's kind of an interesting place to be working. And we've got our featured talk now by Chris. So Chris, I'm going to go ahead and hand the floor away to you.
Thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, so hi, everyone. So today we're just going to be talking about Sorbet, which is a static type checker for Ruby. Oh, good. I was going to see, can everyone see my screen? And apparently everyone can. If you can't see my screen, let me know. You should see like the first slide up there. And also, if you have trouble hearing me, please let me know. And I guess the other thing to remind you of too is that if you have any questions, apparently there's a bit of a lag between chat and the video and everything. So if you have any questions, what Kelsey will do is she will kind of record them in chat. And then when I pause, every once in a while, I'll pause and ask if there's any questions. And she'll just kind of ask them to me then. And then we can take it from there. Yeah, so why don't we get started here? All right, so a little bit about myself. So again, my name is Chris Cumming. I run a software consulting company called Saturday Morning Productions, which is mostly just me. Right now, I do a lot of subcontracting with a company out in the States that works on legacy code. They're called, they're called Corgi Bytes. And that's where I joined them through the Legacy Code Rocks community. So if anyone's ever interested in legacy code, or refactoring or anything like that, I suggest checking out Corgi Bytes, and then also check out the Legacy Code Rocks community. It's a good community if you ever have to support an old piece of software, which I think pretty much everyone has at some point or another. So like right now I'm working on several old Rails apps. So one's an old Rails 3, which was on Ruby 1.9, but we upgraded them to Ruby 2. So hopefully we can get up to a supported version of Ruby sometime in the future. The other project was only on Rails 4. Now they're up to Rails 5, and we're going to get them up to 6 hopefully here right away. So yeah, and if you ever want to contact me, all my contact information's on there. Twitter, I'm not very active on Twitter, but email is always a great way, or the DevEdmonton Slack. There's a little picture of me, cartoon picture. That's how you find me on Slack. So, all right. So I guess a couple things. So the way this will work is we'll talk about Sorbet a little bit. We'll talk about types and various kind of type checking, and that's supported in other languages aside from Ruby, and then kind of discuss why you would want to use Sorbet. And then we'll go through a little example. So there's on the Sorbet website, they got a live demo you can run where you can see some Sorbet. So we'll go through some of those examples. And then time permitting, we'll actually initialize Sorbet in an existing Rails application just so people can see how that works. So yeah, so what is Sorbet? As the slide says, it's basically a type checker. So it's a type checker for Ruby. It's mostly a static type checker, but it's also a dynamic type checker. So what static means is that it'll type check your code before you actually run your application. So in some ways, it's going to work a lot like a lot of other statically typed languages. So like C# is one, or C. But most languages that are compiled are statically type checked. So it'll provide some of those features that those languages have to Ruby, so you can catch errors early. It also has dynamic type checking when it's running, but I haven't played around with that as much, so I won't be able to comment too much on it. All right. I guess I should start. Any questions for right now?
Not yet there, Chris. I think we're good so far.
All right. Okay. So so before we go into Sorbet a little bit more, I thought I'd talk about what exactly is a type. So at least as far as I'm concerned in this discussion, if you go on the interwebs, you're going to find lots of different discussions about types and how they should be defined and used. But I kind of found this description of it that I really liked, and that's kind of how I've always thought of as a type. It's like you define this little piece of data. You're kind of defining the operations that you wanted to perform on it, and kind of the operations you don't want to perform on it. And it's like you've defined what this data represents and how it can be used. So to me, that's what a type is. So if you have like a type of a string, we have some assumptions about how strings should work and how they shouldn't work, right? If you have a type of an integer, you have some assumptions about how that data should work. Sorry, just let me check my notes here. And most programming languages you have these days are typed programming languages. If you want an untyped language, you want to do something like assembly is basically an untyped language. In that case, you can do anything you want to the underlying bits. There's no type safety at all. You can flip bits. You can treat a number as a string. Basically, assembly is kind of the best example of an untyped language. Pretty much all other languages have some sort of type enforcement on them or type checking. It just depends on the degree and how they go about actually checking what those types are. So yeah, most languages, as far as I'm concerned, are type languages, unless you're just writing raw bits and everything. So this would be, so I'm not sure how this is going to work over YouTube, but this would be the participation type. So I have the chat window open. I'll see if there's any delay, but what are examples of types that people use in different languages? Like, does anyone just throw them in the chat there? Or send them to Kelsey, one of the two. So yeah, so we got a string, I see from Carl there. Int or integer, depends on your language, how that's defined, yeah. Any others? Yeah, floats. So those are a lot of those in languages. Those are like primitive types, so they're built into the language themselves. It can be either or. So like a composite type, right? Like an array or like a class, right? Those are composite types. Those are basically combining primitive types for that language into a larger type. So like some common ones in Ruby is like a hash. That's a type that's used all the time. It's kind of somewhat unique to Ruby. Like it's not a primitive type because Ruby, as far as I understand, really doesn't have any primitive types, but a hash is it might as well be a primitive type in Ruby. Yeah, and then some other ones. So like if you're a C programmer, like unsigned integers is like a type, right? So you can have signed and unsigned integers. Yeah, enumerations, that's a good one too. Those are different types. So yeah, so basically most people, you guys have shouted out most of those ones. I guess the other one that comes up in Ruby is kind of a symbol. That's kind of a unique one to Ruby, as far as I know. There are probably other languages that have that, but Ruby is the one that first introduced me to that. If you're like an older school programmer, you know about pointers. That's a data type, right? And references, which are kind of like the kids' version of pointers these days. Yeah, arrays, lists, collections, stuff like that, right? Yeah, those are all kind of types. Yeah, and then of course you can have generic. Oh yeah, the variant. So if anyone's ever used VB, VB6 and also VB.NET also had a type called variant, which you could stuff basically anything into. Which, if those people that come from Ruby, that's like, oh, it's not a big deal. Every variable you can just shove any type of data you want into that variable. But that was kind of mind blowing for me, and the cause of a lot of issues actually, especially when you were working with the VB6 code, because you weren't sure, did that variant contain an integer, array? Did someone shove a class in there? Like, who knew? I don't think C# ever had variants. It's a VB.NET feature. Sorry, I just seen Kelsey in the chat ask, does C# still have variants? So I don't think C# ever had it. As far as I know, that was a VB6 feature. And then, of course, when VB.NET came along, they tried to carry over as many VB6 features as they could for backwards compatibility, and variants got ported over. So yeah, some examples of types. And then, so what is type safety or type system, or sometimes people call it type checking, right? So different languages have various different ways that they will enforce type safety. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, so various languages have different ways to enforce type safety, and we'll go through some of those in a minute. But does anyone want to I don't know, shout out some ways? I keep saying shout out, chat out, I guess. Some ways that type safety is enforced, or some examples. Yeah, you can just throw those in the chat. Like how does Ruby? So Ruby does have some type checking in it. Like you can do things in Ruby that won't get caught. There's no compiler. There's no static checking right now. But when you're at runtime, I've had type checking issues before. So basically it becomes a runtime exception. So I guess I'm not going about this the right way, but basically what I'm trying to get is that Ruby has basically dynamic type checking, right? So it checks it when the program's running. It doesn't actually know before the program is run what your like if you have a variable called myvar, it's not going to know what type that is until the actual application is running. Other languages, you're able to check what a variable should be, or if an expression is valid at static, or before it's ran, which is static type checking. So you don't need to run it. You can just look at the actual source code and figure it out. So that's one type of type checking. And then the other type is there's implicit and implicit type conversion. So some languages are very strict on which data you can convert to another type of data. So like if you try to convert a string to an integer, you have to explicitly cast it. You have to say, I want the string to become an integer and somehow transform that into an integer. Other languages will just do it for you. So going back, so VB6 and VB.NET, you could be very implicit type checking if you wanted it to. So you could actually have like some string and you could try to add it to a number, and VB would just do its best to try to convert that string to a number and add it together and stuff like that. Or it would take a number and convert it to a string to like just append it to your string. So, oh, okay. So I see Kelsey here said Python versus Ruby is a good example of explicit versus implicit. I don't know much about Python, so maybe Kelsey, or if someone could throw in the chat the difference between the two. So is Python is really strict on its type, like it forces you to cast everything, I'm assuming? We'll wait a minute here and see if Kelsey jumps in or throw something up in the chat.
Yeah, I was typing an answer, but I guess I could just hop in here. Yeah, so in Python, for example, if you want to iterate something as if it's a list, it needs to actually be a list. So you need to cast it into the list type before. In Ruby, you can take a hash and it'll treat it as if, because it'll apply the enumerable methods to it as if it's already what you expect it to be. And Ruby's a lot more forgiving about that, is it will sort of just expect what you want to do, whereas in Python you have to do it exactly, or it's just going to complain and not do it at all.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you very much for that example. So yeah, one thing I'm definitely missing with doing these virtual presentations is other people participating. So if you want to throw something in the Slack, we can read it off, or myself or Kelsey can read it off if you have something good to say. Yeah. And I always think of these two kind of things. So these are the two types of type checking that you find in most languages. Some people talk about strongly typed languages and weakly typed languages, but as far as I can tell, there's no like official definition of them. What most people usually mean by that is that when they say like it's a weakly typed language, is that you can't, that's static. It means you can usually, what's the best way to word this? They're usually saying that you can't statically determine what type of variable will be. So that's why they say like Ruby is a weakly typed language. That's the definition I see most people come up with. But if you have a different definition of weakly typed languages and strongly typed languages, let me know. But it's interesting that I always think of these as sliders that the languages allow, right? So how dynamic and how static you are. So like C# is mostly a statically typed language, but you can do some dynamic type checking, right? You can use reflection and stuff like that to do some things that you can easily do in a dynamically typed language like Ruby. It takes a little more work in C#, but each language kind of has these sliders that they go through. So where Ruby is a dynamically typed language, but it also will reject things when you try to compare. Like if you try to compare an integer to a string at runtime, it's going to complain. It's going to throw an error to that. So whether you think that's strong typing or weak typing, I don't know. And then even things like C. C is kind of if anyone has ever worked in C, it will try to, if you compare a float to an integer, most C compilers will just let that happen. But they will convert one of them on the fly. They'll implicitly convert one of them. And then you have to make sure that you know, okay, is it going to convert the int to the float or the float to the int? Like each language kind of has their methods of how they implicitly convert things. But so even some languages that you think are really strict on their types actually have some implicit type conversion. So statically, you can figure out what most of the variables are be, but yeah, even when at runtime, there'll be some implicit type conversion. So okay, and then so why do we talk about this? So what does Sorbet do for us? So Sorbet basically adds, so Ruby has dynamic type checking, but Sorbet adds static type checking to it. So that before you even run your Rails application, Sorbet is able to go through, parse through your files and say, hey, we noticed here that you treat this variable as an integer, but later on you're trying to assign a string to it. Did you mean to do that? The other nice thing it can do is it can say, hey, we think this variable might be null, or I guess, sorry, nil. If I keep saying null, it's my habit from other languages. Excuse me. But that this variable might be nil, or you're going to be using a nil reference. Like we've all got those before. Those are super annoying. And so that's one of the big benefits I find Sorbet adds. It adds a lot of the error checking I was used to for a compiled language, for a static. So most statically typed languages are compiled languages. So usually when I ran a compiler in C#, you get some error because you tried to use a class incorrectly or something like that. And I really miss those errors because they would come back to bite me in Ruby. So I think some people that have never worked in a statically typed language, I don't know, you have to work in it, I think, to see the benefits of that. And then you have to get bitten, I think, a couple of times in Ruby or JavaScript. I think is a great one. A lot of people use JavaScript, and all that dynamic typing, I think, gets people in trouble. So, any questions? Let me know if I'm going too fast, too slow, because we're almost done this boring part, and then we'll do some examples.
It seems like it's pretty quiet right now, but I'll pop in and let you know if anyone does ask anything of you.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. So this is basically why I think people should use Sorbet. And I'm kind of in the camp that you should do as much type checking and error handling automated as you can. So I know sometimes it's not the most popular opinion, but just having worked, especially if I've had to work with old legacy Rails apps for a while, it can be extremely frustrating not knowing what the data type is, or someone magically added, like they use duck typing and they magically added a method to an object, and you're trying to figure out where this magic method just appeared. And the reason we call it magic is because we don't understand it, right? If we understood it, it wouldn't be called magic. So, I'm starting to like magic less and less. So anytime a language says, "Oh, we have magic that does this behind the scenes," that really starts to scare me, because it means I don't fully understand what's going on, and I'm probably going to get bit by some bugs. So, but anyway, these are some of the static type checking errors that Sorbet will find for you that I'm sure most of you ran into with your Ruby app, right? So like the first one is if you're comparing a string to like an integer or something like that, Sorbet can find those types of errors before you run the app. So you don't have to worry about having that in production. You can explicitly define what you expect a method to return. So Ruby has that weird thing. Well, sometimes it'll return an int, sometimes it'll return a string. You can kind of do that with Sorbet, but it really forces you to narrow down your function and your argument types. So like what you expect and what you expect into a function and what you expect out of a function. Which again, if you're just trying to debug a giant Rails app and you're looking at a method and it just accepts some argument like customer, like what is that? Is that like the customer active record? Is that the customer model class? Or sorry, is that the customer ID? Is that some other customer piece of data? Like, is it their name? You don't really know a lot of times in Rails, I find. It can be very tricky to figure out what the heck is being passed in there. It can check for nil. So it can say, hey, I think you're going to use a nil reference here. You should maybe check that you didn't screw something up. It can find dead code, which is nice. So working with legacy code again, man, there's lots of dead code out there that's just been sitting there rotting. I wish dead code actually smelled, because then it'd be easier to find. But all it is just sitting there. And then especially in applications that they don't have any static type checking, it's really hard to figure out, is this code actually used, especially when you can do dynamic things like dynamically adding methods or anything like that. So again, C# is also pretty good at finding dead code, but you can also run into a problem with C# where you think this code is dead, but someone's using reflection to get to that method. So like I said, all those languages have sliders. So even though I maybe complain about Ruby, all languages have these issues, and they all have those sliders at various points in them. And then Sorbet actually lets you implement a couple features that other programming languages have, more object-oriented features that Ruby is missing. So you can create like a type-safe generic class, which is kind of interesting. And then you can also create so in other languages, when you create an interface and then you have a class, for those of you who don't know, like, and then you inherit from that interface, or you use that interface, I guess is a better term. You have to implement those methods in the interface, or the compiler or the static type checker will complain. Well, with Sorbet, you can add a feature to do that too. So a lot of times you'll see in Rails applications where people will create basically what is an interface, but there's no type enforcement around it. You just created a class that acts like an interface, and then you implement that class somewhere else. But if you forget to implement a method, that could cause you issues, right? So Sorbet will do stuff like that. So, all right. So let's. I'm gonna first of all. So there's two things I'm going to do here, depending on how people feel and how much time we have. So I'm going to go basically to the Sorbet website, and I'll show you. They have an online real-time. I don't even know what to call it. Like interface where you can enter a Ruby code, and Sorbet will type check it on the fly. So we're going to go there and we'll play around a little bit with that. And then time permitting, if people are interested, I'll actually show you how to set up Sorbet in an existing Rails app. So, which is probably what you really want to do. So just give me a sec here to bring up my other screen.
I had a question for you here in the meantime there, Chris. I'm gonna
Sure.
just put it, actually, I can't. Yeah, it's not showing up. I'll just ask it for you and pop it in if it shows up. We got a question from Mark. Would you use an interface when you're also mixing in a module to a class?
Would you use an interface when you're also using a module for a class? So maybe I don't fully understand it. So I don't understand what you mean by using a module for a class. Here, let me bring up the chat.
We'll see if they'll clarify. But while he types out a clarification, if he's got one, I've got something
mixing in a module to a class. Oh, you know that I don't know. So I'm relatively new to Ruby. So what I use an interface. Because yeah, so like what's the equivalent to a mix-in like a language like C++?
If you're pulling in a method from a module, that would
be so like interfaces in other languages don't actually have any logic inside them. They just define the methods that this object must support, and then it's up to each individual class to define those methods inside of them. For things like a mix-in, if I remember correctly, so you have a Ruby class and you pull in some methods from a module, you're getting all that logic inside the module as well. So to me, that is very similar to like C++. That's like multiple inheritance, where you're inheriting methods from a variety of different sources. Does that seem reasonable? There's always a bit of a delay.
He says that he'll use modules a lot, and will often write a spec set of shared examples, which he'll include in the specs for classes mixing in.
After writing specs. Oh, okay. So yeah, if you're talking about using, if you're talking about using a module that just has the methods defined but no logic inside of those methods, then that's basically an interface. As far as a guy who grew up on C and Java, well, that's Turbo Pascal way back in university days. That's an interface. You don't define any logic. So I think in that case, probably using the Sorbet interface would probably be a good idea, where it prevents you from. So you would basically mix in that module, but it would prevent you from failing to implement one of the methods. Say that module had like say 3 methods in it. I don't know if people can see my fingers. 3 methods in there, but you only implemented 2 of them. Sorbet would complain. It would say, "Hey, you implemented 2 of these 3 methods. You need to implement the 3rd one." And that's a feature you see in other languages like C#. If you have an interface and you implement that interface and forget to implement 1 or 2 of the methods, then it'll complain. So. Okay, so Mark said that makes sense. Thanks. So hopefully that all helped. Yeah, I really missed seeing everyone in person here, and having like a whiteboard would be great.
Yeah, it does help. Yeah, I've got a question for you as well.
Oh, sure.
Here. Yeah. So I know one of the things I've been really impressed about with Elixir and the XDoc system, which builds documentation for your programs along with when you're writing it. Like it's baked right into the language. When you write those type annotations, that gets included in your documentation automatically. Now, is there a way to integrate Sorbet with like RDoc or with Yard when you're building your Ruby documentation?
Not that I'm aware of right now, but it wouldn't surprise me that's coming. So yeah, because basically tools like if you use RubyMine, the IDE RubyMine, for your Ruby applications, it supports writing yard documentation, and then it will also try to do a little bit of this static type checking for you. I don't know if you've seen that. It'll try to do a little bit. It's not that great at it, but it'll try to do it. But yeah, it would not surprise me if tools come out to support basically taking those signatures out of there. So
cool. Yeah, that'd be something to keep an eye out for sure. That'd be useful. Hey, going back.
All right. So here's an example here. So this was the Sorbet playground. I don't know if everyone saw me how I got there. You just go to the Sorbet website. So sorbet.org. It's got a cute little ice cream. So you have to search for Sorbet Ruby. If you just search for Sorbet, you'll get a bunch of pictures of yummy ice cream. And then you just click this try online thing. And then on the left is the Ruby code, and on the right is the Sorbet static type checker, just kind of constantly running and reporting errors for you here. So I figured we go through a couple examples in here. Like one of them is the interface, so we can go through that one with Mark. We'll go through a couple of these examples, and then we'll just jump into actually implementing this into implementing Sorbet in a real Rails application. So one of the first things you'll notice is there's going to be every file that you want Sorbet to type check, you have to put this typed up here. There's different values for it. So there's ignore, which just basically means tell Sorbet don't type this file. False, which tells Sorbet to parse the file, because so ignore means to completely ignore it, don't even read the file. But false will tell it to look at the file and maybe pull out some of the signatures, but don't actually try to do any error checking on that file, because maybe another file depends on this file that you type to false. So false is the usual default that you'll see when you actually implement Sorbet into one of your existing Rails application. It will automatically put this typed at the top, and it'll put a lot of them for false. So true means it's doing most of the type checking, and then there's one called strict. But as far as my understanding of it is, most people aren't going to use strict because it's so strict that it's really hard to do anything with it. It's like one of those languages that university professors use, or it's, I don't know, some university professor in comp sci thought up of. That's like, this language is 100% type checked everything. But it's basically unusable because it's too strict. So yeah, so most of the times you'll see this type true at the top of your file. So then we have a class here. So this probably should look pretty familiar to people. But then we do have this signature thing. So this is we have these two things here. This is a Sorbet thing. So to get this signature method in here, you have to extend this tsig from Sorbet. And then, of course, down here is the type main. So, and this is just reporting the errors that it's found, right? So if we ignore this signature, sorry, it keeps popping up things. So this signature basically defines that we're expecting this parameter to accept an integer and return a string, right? And we have the one method called bar. So the first error is that it caught for us is a typo. So this is another common error with Ruby is typos. Especially for those that can't spell, like myself. So RubyMine is really great, is that it corrects your spelling, which has saved me immensely. But yeah, it'll find, so if a method doesn't exist on there, it'll complain, right? So you can fix it by that, right? Or if you go here, it fixes either way. And now this one is a type mismatch. Sorry. Is a type mismatch, right? Because you said I want an integer, but this one is passing in a string, right? So you can just fix it like this, or if you went up here and change this to a string, whatever you need to do, right? So, and that's basically what Sorbet does. So unless, I think Visual Studio Code will implement it where it'll do this checking on the fly for you. But most of the time, I'm a RubyMine guy. So what I usually do is I write my code, and then I'll run Sorbet, the static type checker, just like in my terminal, and it'll report errors, kind of like how you saw on the side. Like, so basically I'll run it, and then I'll get a couple errors that'll come out here too. And then the other thing you can use Sorbet for, if you're feeling really adventurous, is the autocorrect, which I haven't tried that often, but you could try it. So the other thing I should know too is Sorbet is very beta right now. So I think they're at version 5. 0.59 or something like that. So it's kind of use at your own risk, and things will break quite frequently. So I've had problems where you install Sorbet and then you install the next version of Sorbet because they're releasing it like every day, and then the next version just suddenly things stop working, and so you have to roll back or just wait till they release the next one. So oh, I'm not sure. I just see Mark here saying, I wish Abram Hindle was here. He's a type expert for sure. Oh, that would be great. So maybe he can watch this and let me know his thoughts and correct me on what I thought of types there. So maybe we won't jump. Let's look at. We'll jump into the interface one there in a minute. So we'll go to this dead code one here. So this is a really handy one, right? Where it's going to tell you that certain code is unreachable. So because Rails does some weird thing where as long as it's not 0 or what nil, like this if is always weird. So it's nice that it'll find dead code in your file. So I'm sure once you run this, you'll be amazed at the spots of dead code that you thought were super useful. And then of course you can fix this by something like that, right? So this code might never be reached, but with randomness, but at least it has a potential to be reached. So the nillable array access, that one's kind of a weird one, but it kind of shows nil access, right? So so there's a couple things in Sorbet that I usually don't recommend doing. So this one's kind of showing an example that this T must is kind of you overriding. So there's a couple things in Sorbet where you say, no, Sorbet, you were wrong, I'm right. And so T must says, like, I am sure that foo will never be nil. So before you ever go and using some of these T dot methods to override some of what Sorbet is recommending, I highly urge you to check to make sure that you're not wrong, because most of the time you're going to be wrong, right? So because clearly this is nil, right? So T colon array is a type safe way for you to declare an array in Sorbet. So instead of declaring, if you just did bar equals array, this is how you usually declare an array, right? But in this type of array declaration, you're not saying what this array holds. So it can hold anything. It can hold integers, strings, objects, it doesn't really matter. With this declaration down here, you're saying this array can only hold strings. So why don't we just muck around with this for a little bit? So I can't really see if you're all interested in this or not. So if you're not, let me know. If you are, post it in the chat. So anyway, I'm just going to show you that if you try to assign something, so if you put this to 1, it's going to complain, right? Oh, I got this here. Oh, what did I do wrong here? Oops, yeah. There we go. Oh, it's not complaining. Oh, what did I do wrong there? Oh, this is where the demo part falls apart. Oh, that's surprising. I would have thought that would complain. Huh, okay. So that didn't work so great. We'll just have to go on to the next example. Does anyone have any questions?
We do. We've got a question here from Carl. Can you define your own types with Sorbet?
Can you define your? Not as far as I'm aware. Usually you have to have like a class or something like that, right? Like Sorbet kind of works off the fact that you've defined a class or you've defined some sort of composite, like a struct or something like that, and then you need to use it. Can you define your own? I don't think you can. That wouldn't make it. So you would define a type that doesn't exist in your application. I don't think that. Maybe I'm misunderstanding something, but I don't think that makes any sense. So I don't think Sorbet supports that. That's an excellent question, though. That's something. Something we'd have to look up. Thanks, Carl. You got me thinking. All right, so this is Mark's, so an interface, right? I picked intersection. I think there we go. We'll start with I. Here's the interface one. So what you need to do for this one is you need to declare this abstract here. And that tells you that this is an abstract class, also known sometimes as an interface. So you declare it like that. And then so down here, they've included fooable, and they've defined foo, right? But here they haven't defined foo. So that's basically what the error you're getting here, right? If you define foo, it goes away. And then if you go here, get bar, add a signature to this. Right now, both of them are going to complain because we did not add, we have not defined the bar method there. So, and then you could do things like, I can do this one without screwing it up. So this one has to return a string. Now it's defined here. But then if you try and do something like one, that'll complain first, and then I can fix this guy. Oh, it's not finding that. I might have the signature incorrect. Man, none of my examples are working. I think that one's been complained now. Maybe it doesn't work for abstract ones. So if we just do, all right, let's do this. We got rid of this as an abstract. We got rid of this. Oh yeah, so I guess it doesn't handle it because it's okay. So unfortunately, it doesn't do checking for that your abstract method is actually returning the right thing. I'm sure they're going to add that later, but yeah, that's unfortunate. So sorry, does everyone see what I was trying to experiment with there? So you can define an abstract method. It'll check if that method exists, but it doesn't do any checking that the method that you created, at least not yet, I'm sure they're going to add it, returns the correct value for you. So if that doesn't, sorry.
In that case, Chris, would you have to define the signature in the implementation? Like when you're defining bar in the good fooable, would you have to then say like there what type you expect it to return?
Yeah, I imagine that would work, but that kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we went here and then we have this, we have to do extend sig. Yeah, you'd have to put the same thing here. Yeah, so that's going to complain because now we're returning a string. Okay. So what's it complaining about here? Oh, right. So we're overriding this now, so we need to. I forget the syntax for override. So anyway, so like Ruby doesn't really support overriding, but Sorbet will also allow you. Basically, it's adding features to other object-oriented language have, like interfaces, overriding methods that other languages have. So like in C#, if you're going to override a method from a parent class, you have to explicitly declare that you're overriding it, so you don't accidentally do it. So I forget what the signature is. Not declared with override. Does it tell me how to fix it right away? I don't know. Let's try. Yeah. All right. So sorry, I don't know all the. So I don't know all the syntax for Sorbet yet. I've just been playing around with it. But that's kind of the gist of it. So they're still adding features. If you ever want to play with things, just come to this website, type in your Ruby code, and see what you get. Is there any other examples people want to see, or should I go right to implementing it in an actual project? I'll take a drink while we wait for people to answer that. Oh, okay. I see the question for Carl there. He said, maybe define your own types isn't really what I meant. Can you declare that a method only takes arguments of type A, where A is a class that you define? Yes, you can do that. So let's let me take a look. Oh, this is just a long way to define a signature. So maybe let's just, okay, let's wing it. We're going to try our own here. So if we define class foo, and then we have class bar, and then we want a method. So we have to do extends. Excuse me. Oh, I mentioned like that. Just extend, there we go. And then, so say we have a method, blah, and it takes foo here, right? So then what we can do is we can go here and params, if I remember correctly. And then this is, oh, where'd all my keys go? No, I have to think now. I don't think it's just foo. I think you have to do t.type foo. Oh, well, let's take a quick look. So if we go to Sorbet, signatures. The one thing is the documentation is also really nice. So, oh, I forgot. I have to declare the type. Right. Okay. So, or sorry, the actual parameter. I have to go foo. Is it code? Maybe I shouldn't have called them the same thing. Oh, just let me put foo. That's kind of like that. Oh, probably not. This is where you'd all be yelling at me, and like if I was doing this live, you'd be like, "No, this is what you need to do." Oh, you can do block parameters. Did I miss it? Reset parameters, keyword parameters. String. It was Sorbet t.type. Type to type. Yeah. So those are fine. User defined class types. Oh, it should be just okay. Okay. So why did I? Because I didn't do that. Avoid. Oh, oops. One there. What am I? See, now, Carl, why'd you have to go and ask that tough question there? What am I doing wrong? Contact. All right. There it is. I still need this guy here. There you go. And this. There we go. Okay, sorry about all that formatting. Okay, so yeah, you're right. So sorry, Carl, that took a while to get to. But so if you have a class called foo, you can just pass it in, or you can specify that this method only takes foos in this case. In this case, it returns an integer. So if you try to do something like, I don't know what's another function name here, boot. And inside here, you tried to call blah with integer. It's not going to like that, right? So, right, method bar blah specified that foo as foo. So sorry about the delay there, but excuse me. Hopefully that answered your question there. Is that Carl? Yeah. Cool. So I think that's good enough. So it's almost been an hour. So do people still want me to try and implement this in an actual application? Basically, we'll just show you basically how to run the Sorbet setup steps. If people are willing to sit around for that, I can do that. Otherwise, we can always set up a second meeting, or maybe I can record another video or something like that if people are itching to go. I can't hear you there, Kelsey. I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, my headset stopped working for a moment there. Yeah, Mark would definitely like to see it in the code base, and so would I. So if you're willing to go ahead with that, then that'd be great.
Okay, yeah, I'm willing to go ahead of that. So thank you all for your patience. I know it's like super nice out there today. So thanks you all for taking a beautiful fall Saturday afternoon to come listen to me talk about not ice cream. All right, so get this out of the way. So what I'm actually using Mark, not a different Mark. Mark, I think his last name is pronounced Reimer. He's got his effective website. So I like that he uses for a template for building his actual production-ready website. So I like that because it's a lot more involved than my simple little website template stuff that I have. Like most of my, well, my client work, I can't obviously show that, but my like little website does not have much in it, so it's not a very good example. So what I've done is I basically just cloned his effective website. I had to make some changes to get it to run. So Matt, if you're watching this, I'll have to create a PR or something so we can fix. Oh, I also had to, did I downgrade him to Docker to, oh no, I didn't have to. Okay, so one thing to note too is that Sorbet is not officially supported with Ruby 2.7 yet, and this effective website is on 2.7, but from the little bit of testing I did, it seemed to work just fine. So I didn't have to downgrade his website, but you might experience some errors if you're using some of the new features of Ruby 2.7. So, all right.
On your Ruby mine there, we could definitely use a bit of Zoom if that's something you can do.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Oops, wrong one. So I'm assuming the terminal too. Plus. How's that for the terminal for now? That's not Ruby mine.
Much better.
Okay. What's in the background here is just Git Kraken, my
okay.
My Git IDE. Because I'm not a very good command line guy. I can never remember all the command lines to run, so I'm an interface. I'm a guy that likes interfaces. All right, so if we go to the effective website, I've made sure that I pull back to this commit. Okay, good. So we use Docker to run this website, so I'm just going to make sure it still builds. All right, so that looks good. So you don't have to run this. I just like running things in Docker because I don't like to pollute my host machine with all the different versions of Rubies and third-party libraries and all that stuff. So, but you don't have to run any of this in Docker. You can run this all. You can install. You can just Sorbet is basically a gem, so you can just run this all locally in your host machine or virtual machine or whatever you're most comfortable in. But so you can, if you want to, just ignore all this Docker moment. Once I'm inside of Docker, you can just ignore it and pretend that's like I'm on your I'm on a host machine. Yeah, you can ignore this too, because basically we have Docker set up it'll install gems if they're missing or anything right when you first start Docker. So again, you can ignore all that. So assuming you have a website up and running that works just fine. I just want to make sure nothing's in here. Okay, so sorry, I just want to check when I checked everything out that all the everything that I want deleted got deleted. Okay. So the instructions are actually really good too. So if we bring up the, we go back to Sorbet here. The documentation is great. So, so you're going to want to go to adopting Sorbet. So basically, you just install these two gems. So the Sorbet runtime is what gives you your runtime type checking. So it's kind of optional if you don't want to install that. Oops, wrong one. Oh, what am I doing? I need to now. So this might be a little small too. Can people see that okay, or do you need me to make Visual Studio Code a little bigger?
That's still a little small. If you can bump it up a little bit.
All right, let's see if I can figure out how to do that. View. Right. Zoom in, equal sign this time. Okay. Which I guess is the same as a plus. There. How's that?
Looks pretty good.
Okay. So sorry, I don't have the chat window open anymore. So I'll rely on Kelsey. If people are chatting, I'll rely on Kelsey to jump in and let me know. So what was I doing? I was looking. That's big. So I was looking for my gem file here. So I guess it doesn't really matter where we put them. So you'll add your Sorbet gem. This is the static type checker. So this one you only need in your development group. You don't want that in production. And then the Sorbet runtime, time. That one you'll just want in anyone, in both production and development. So we have those. I'm just going to make sure all my gems kicking around. I want. Okay, I did have. Oh yeah, so okay, clean all that up. It's good. Install. All right, so this will basically install Sorbet, the gems. All right, let's see, do I see those in there? Yeah, so there's Sorbet. All right, so again, it changes frequently. So if you find a version of Sorbet that works, you might want to lock that in your gem file because they do, if you go to the GitHub page, they do updates like every day, every couple of days. Well, they do updates a lot to the GitHub releases, but they push to Ruby gems every day or every couple of days. So you're going to get a new release that might break things. So you might want to put your version in there if you find one that works. Because like I said before, I've had trouble where I upgraded all my gems and I got a new Sorbet and then suddenly things broke. But if I rolled it back like one or two versions, everything was fine. So, all right. So you have to install it like that. And then basically you can do some little testing. We're not going to do that. This is the command you're going to do. So Sorbet SRB init. So this can take a couple minutes. And the other thing, this is a little tip that I ran into for people that are running with Docker. So Docker on Mac has an actual memory limit of only 2 gigs. So I bumped mine up to 8. It's because I was getting this weird kill message when I was trying to run Sorbet in it the first time. So if you're on Docker on Mac and you're getting weird messages that like you're running Docker and it just says kill and then it just the process just dies, that could be why. So to actually initialize in it, you just run this. It's going to give you this big warning. Because what's it gonna? It's gonna do one thing is not too destructive. It's going to create a Sorbet folder in your root folder, and it's going to add a bunch of files in there. So that one's not very destructive because worst case you just delete that Sorbet folder and Sorbet's gone. The more destructive, not really destructive, the pain in the butt to roll back if you had to, is it's gonna put that. Remember how we had that comment that like that pound true at the top in the Sorbet playground here, or this pound type true. It's going to put that on the top of pretty much every file. So that's the part that's a little difficult to roll back. So if you're going to do this in an application, you're not sure if you want it or not, you'd have to write like some script that went through each one of your files and removed this typed part if you needed to ever roll it back. So that's the only downside. So we're going to answer yes. And this is going to take a minute. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask away. Oh, maybe I can. Let me see if I can bring up the chat window again here too. Oh, yeah, there we go. Oh, so Kelsey just said, "You mean there are Git commands besides Git push origin master?" Yeah, I guess so. I don't know what they are. I just right-click in Git Kraken, and I say merge this branch, undo this checkout, roll this back. So. Now, one error you might get that they've slowly been addressing is if you have some gem that's not what they have is basically some mappings of all the third-party gems or a bunch of them, and they've slowly been increasing that. But if you have some third-party gem that for some reason it can't find or it can't parse correctly, so Sorbet will go through all your gems because it needs those gems to make sure. It needs the signatures of all the files in your gems to make sure you're using those classes correctly inside your actual project. You might have to comment out a gem to get it to work. So like in the past, I've had trouble with the Selenium WebDriver gem, but I think they fixed that one. So I would comment that gem out, bundle install without the gem, run Sorbet, and then add the gem back in. And then the other problem I've had is with Active Merchant. Has a link to some other third party, like in my particular case was Braintree. So it would try to parse the active record gem and it would say, oh, there's no Braintree. I can't find anything about Braintree. So what I'd have to do is I'd temporarily add the Braintree gem in, run the Sorbet command so it could find all the Braintree classes and stuff, and then remove that gem again. So, but yeah, they've been slowly adding more and more, especially the popular third party gems. So, I got a question from Carl here. Thoughts on Sorbet versus the native type checking that's supposedly coming in Ruby 3? Yeah, so my basic understanding, I haven't done much research in Ruby 3, unfortunately, about their type checking, but my understanding is that they won't require you to put any of that signature stuff in your file like Sorbet does. It's all going to be handled in third-party files, and I think that's more for backwards compatibility and easy to roll back. Whether that's the right way to go or not, I don't know. But that's my basic understanding of the both of them. I know they have a. There, let's take a look. Sorbet.
Yeah, from what I understand as well, to jump in a little bit here, is Sorbet does want to support the RBS annotations as well, but a big difference between the philosophy is Sorbet is built on the inline style annotations that just are right above the methods that you're defining, whereas the Ruby is going to be like with Ruby 3, the RBS files are completely separate and aside from. So they'd like to support that in the static checking, but that's not in it yet.
Yeah, so I don't know which is better, because way back in the C days, you used to have like C header files where you defined a bunch of your structures, like there wasn't classes in C, but you would define a bunch of stuff in your header file, and then you'd had a separate. So you had a .h file and a .c file. And I guess personally I wasn't a big fan of that because you had to keep flipping back and forth between the two files to figure out where your types were defined. I guess nowadays IDEs take care of that where you just do dot whatever and it finds it. So currently, I'm a fan of actually having the signatures right in the method. Then I don't have to go look in a separate file. Like I said, my guess is that with the, I guess, what do they call them? RBS files. If Ruby implements RBS files, then both, like, I think IDEs will eventually support both, or, well, they'll support the winner. Everyone ends up winning. And if it's RBSs in separate files, your IDE will probably take care of most of the type checking for you. Like, it'll tell you, like, it'll go parse that file and then have a little tooltip pop up or something goofy like that. That's my guess. So, oh, and yeah, so the other thing I should point out is that Sorbet does gradual type checking. So it's kind of like a linter. Like if you take a linter and you run a linter on an existing project, it's probably going to find it's going to complain about a whole bunch of stuff. So usually what you do, like if you're running Rubocop, did they ever change the name of that? I don't think they did. So Rubocop, when you run that on an existing project, it complains a bunch, but you set up like an ignore file, right? And that's kind of what Sorbet does as well, right? It's gonna, the Sorbet in it's gonna go through and it's gonna parse all our files. And it's gonna find out which files like it can't correctly, that don't have signatures defined and aren't type safe, and it's just gonna set them to, most of them it's gonna set to false. And then the idea is that you go in there and as you work on that file, you change that type false to type true, and then it starts reporting errors on that. So I don't know if RBS supports the same thing. I'm assuming it will, because that'd be a real pain in the butt if it didn't. So yeah, what's the type of that? So yeah, I'm excited to see the both. Competition is always good. I'm always a fan of competition. Well, I'm a fan of competition as long as I don't pick the loser. So it's like if you have like a Betamax like we did, not great. But I love it, the fact that it keeps pushing each side to be more innovative. So I'm glad that there's actual competition to it. Oh, okay, so Sorbet is done. So that's great. So now what you can do, well, let's just say what it says up here. So use SRB. You don't have to even have to type TC. You just type SRB. Oh yeah, so here's where it's talking, actually before I do that, this gradual type checking. So this is what you would do. You go through and find files that are marked as type false, and you set them to type true, and you'll add signatures to your methods and stuff like that. So we type SRB, we should get back no errors. Great job. But it's kind of like running Rubocop on an existing project, telling you to ignore all the errors. It's kind of lying. It's like there's lots of errors, but it's just not telling you about them. So the other thing it's going to create, so if you look in our folder here, you're going to see this Sorbet. I'm assuming, is this still big enough for everyone, the text? If not, let me know.
It's good to me. Okay. But if anyone else says, I'll be sure to let you know.
Yeah. If I make it any bigger, it's going to take up too much of my little screen. Oh, man, I bought this MacBook. I think this is a 2018 or 2019 version. And then I have those like 16-inch bigger ones with a real escape key. But I don't know if I want to spend all that money getting a new MacBook so soon. Oh, well. So it's going to create the Sorbet folder. And this is where all these RBI files go. So if you go look in here, there's a config file, some config information, and then RBI. There's a bunch of RBI files in here. So, oh, I don't have less. So, and this is what it looks like. So, I'm not 100% sure what they put in here, but I think they try to define all the methods and everything. So it's going to parse through all your gem files and stuff and just basically do its best guess to think like, here's all the methods that should exist for this object or for this class. And then when you use that class, I can go look at these files and figure out that, yes, okay, you're using it correctly. So I was going to create that. The other thing you're going to notice is maybe best viewed in Visual Studio Code is if you go look at some RBI files here. We go look, say, application controller. So it put this typed false at the top here. So that wasn't there before. Let's do the same. I doubt it put. Oh, okay. So here's type strict. So this one, it was able. Sorbet was able to look at this really simple file and say, hey, there's no type issues at all that we can determine with this file. So we're going to put it at the strictest type checking we possibly can. These other ones, it's like, yeah, there's some type errors in here. We can't determine probably a bunch of stuff. There's no signatures on any. Is there any methods in here? I don't know if there's any methods, but yeah, like this one, we need methods here. Yeah, it probably doesn't know what type current user is, stuff like that. So, right, so that's all good. So now one of the problems you're going to have is because Rails has a pretty extensive library. I guess, is there any questions? Because the other thing we're going to talk about real quick is how you kind of you can. There's another gem that you add to Sorbet, so it makes it work better with Rails actual Rails applications. So you can see all the. Oh, you're going to attach head state. So I don't even know what that means.
I've got a quick question about bringing Sorbet into an existing project. So I saw how when you initialize it, it'll scan your files and kind of set some defaults. As far as switching it on, what's the absolute minimum chunk that you can have it look after? Is it an individual file, or can you enable it for one method at a time if you've got like a fairly big module?
No, it's only for files. As far as I know, it's only for files. So what I've done in the past too is if you have a really big file and say you're making just a change to one little method, what I'll do is I'll turn the true on, and then I'll get all the errors for that file, but I'll only focus on the ones for that method. And then I'll make my changes and I'll make sure those, where's my camera? Those errors go away. And then I'll turn it back to false. Because otherwise, like if you set this up to run in your automated build, that'll fail, right? So that's what I've done.
Right.
It's kind of the same thing I do with Rubocop, because Rubocop works on a file level a lot of times too, or a lot of other linters will work on a file level. Is that I just temporarily turn linting on for that file, make the changes to that one method, because maybe there's like 50 in some old legacy app or something like that, and then make sure that little bit that I've changed passes the linter, and then turn the linter back off for that file. So that's how I try and make things better.
Cool.
Yeah, you can see that it's added all these false to all this stuff, and then if we scroll down, so it does it to all your files, everything that has a RB ending on it. And then here's all the RBIs that it added, right? So, don't make any changes to them. So, I'm not even sure what's all in here, but don't mess with this stuff unless you know what you're doing. And then, our gem file is basically just Sorbet. So then the second thing that you're going to want to add, to a Rails application. Here's my gem file. There it is. Gem. Sorbet. I think it's Rails. Sorbet Rails. And so this you can find right here. Right. So it's basically like Rails has a bunch of dynamic methods. Like Active Record is a good example. Like it just randomly, it magically adds all these methods to objects that Sorbet doesn't know about, right? So when you try to use them, Sorbet is going to complain, or you'll have to manually. That's where kind of you use that Sorbet manual override to say, no, yes, this method really exists. You can ignore that error. But running, including this gem, will help get rid of some of those errors. There's still, I haven't been able to get rid of all of them. So, and then just to install it, so you can install source. Put Sorbet Rails in your application, install it. We'll run this command, and then we need to update some of these definitions. We don't need to update everything, but we'll update those too. So, what are we doing? Bundle, install. So this just generates some RBI files that are specific for Rails. So, and it puts those in your /sorbet folder, and that's why you have to update your definitions again. So. All right. For Rails applications. All right, so that part's done. run the second one. Now this suggests type. What's that's going to do is it's going to look at all of our files in our project, and it's going to, wherever possible, it's going to change that where it said pound type false. It's going to try and set it to true, or basically update them. So, oh, I don't think I checked this in, so we can't. Oh, yeah, we won't be able to see it here. So okay, so basically before when I was doing this, so just so we can see it, so basically after we installed the Sorbet Rails, it changed this, like these couple classes here, to typed true because it was able to figure out enough stuff about them. So, oh, this one went from strict to false for some reason. That one went backwards in time. So yeah, because I didn't commit, there's a huge amount of changes here. So yeah, if you're gonna have a huge commit when you do it, because it, like I said, it goes through every RB file and updates the first line on it. So. All right, so yeah, so that's basically it. Now, if you wanted to actually use Sorbet, so if we type SRB, get no errors, great, good job. Makes me feel so good. So now, if we just what was a good one? Yeah, like this. Sure. So we turn this guy to true. Now it's going to complain, right? Because we're missing some stuff there, right? So yeah. Yeah, can. Yeah, that's going to be a pain in the butt one. Yeah, so then basically you start getting error. So this is where you would start fixing things, and then adding your type checking to your application. So so yeah, that's almost an hour and a half. So yeah, does anyone have any questions? Any thoughts? Oh, no, so I started a big debate about linters now. That's good. It's like the last Dev Edmonton weekly chat we had. There's some new developers there, and one of the guys was like, "Do you guys prefer tabs or spaces?" It's like, oh my god, really? Is this still a thing? So that was like the last 10 minutes of the chat. So that started a bit of a debate there.
I think that's one of the questions that people ask just to get the fists flying.
No, I think it was a legitimate question because he was like a third-year university student, and I think he's experienced that problem for the first time, where like someone is using tabs and someone's using spaces, and then they committed their code, and then whoever checked it out, they got like weird formatted code, right? So I think it was a legitimate question, but when he brought it up, like all the experienced people started laughing. They thought it was pretty funny. Luckily, editors, like that's the solution. Your editor will solve that. Tell it to ignore it, or set your tab size to whatever you want. So.
Yeah, and I mean, because of that, spaces is going to be the answer. But we don't have to argue about it because it's just
yeah.
Spaces is the only right answer, but.
So yeah, but yeah, that's Sorbet. Does anyone have any? I know it's been an hour and a half. So thank you all for your attention. Do you have any last minute questions that I can answer now? If not, you can always ping me in the Dev Edmonton Slack channel, or email me, or something like that.
And also catch you every Tuesday at noon, right?
Yes, Tuesday at noon is the Dev Edmonton weekly chat. So it's just like I said at the beginning of the meetup, it's just a casual coffee chat, virtual casual coffee chat. Maybe we'll start looking actually physically getting together sometime, but for right now it's all just virtual. So just come in. I usually post a topic just to get the discussion going. But sometimes we talk about that topic for the whole time. Other times it goes off course real quick. And then like sometimes we don't even talk about software technologies, just how people are doing and, stuff like that. So yeah, come join the chat.
We do have one question here from Mark before we go. And to paraphrase him, basically, is Sorbet production ready, in your opinion?
Well, I'm using it in one of my clients' projects right now. So I'm going to answer yes. But you have to, I don't know what I would say about that. Probably the biggest thing is if you're working with a bunch of other developers is getting them all on board, right? So with this project I'm on, there's only 2 of us. Otherwise, especially if you set it up as part of your continuous integration build, it's going to start breaking when people don't correctly know how to use Sorbet. So then, yeah, that would be my only concern about that. But yeah, I know Stripe uses it right now. So I'm assuming it's production ready. But it's probably not production ready, but they use it all the time. They dog food it, as far as I understand. So
I'm sure, as you mentioned before, how you can pin it to and should pin it to a certain version if you're having one that works very well for you. They probably, relying on it in a production build, I'm sure they have it pinned.
Yeah, you can see all the releases. Yeah, like see, they do releases every couple of days. So yeah, if you have one that works, just pin it, and then you should be good.
Cool. Well, have you got anything else you'd like to bring up before we close up for the day?
No, I'll just, do I have the last slide or something? Yeah, I think I just have the contact slide here. Yeah, it just talks about Sorbet, and if you have any follow-up questions, give me a shout. Yeah, otherwise, if nobody else has any more questions, thanks again for attending. It was great, especially on, like I said, a nice day like that. I know my family's outside working in the garden right now, so I'll probably have to go out and help.
It is nice out.
Yeah.
I hadn't looked out the window, but it's right in front of me. So yeah, it is a pretty good day. Maybe after I get the YouTube video put up after it's all cut together. But yeah, thanks again, Chris, for the really interesting talk. I know we actually use Sorbet and have used it for quite a while on the YEGRB website, but that's something that Alan set up way back when he was really excited about Sorbet when it first came out. And nothing has really changed with the implementation because I hadn't really learned how it worked. So now that I know, I can actually start playing around with that part of the application. But yeah, as we heard in the chat, Mark wanted us to bring up again real quick that Startup Edmonton is in a couple of weeks. I believe it's the 19th to the 23rd. There's a lot of really interesting talks scheduled. There's some kind of like meet and greets with some of the startups in the industry. So if you're looking for a job, it is a great opportunity. And I'll tell you, actually, I got my first development job last year, and I had my first meeting with one of the developers on the team that got me an interview and got me a job at the company during Startup Week as one of the Startup Week events. So super great for someone who's new to the industry, or if you're just kind of interested in what's going on right now, or you're in the maybe big industry world and want to get into startups and you're just kind of curious what's going on. Really awesome to check out some cool talks, and it's going to be unusual, but probably pretty great this year because you got some really great people who are making sure that it's successful and interesting to attend. So again, thanks for everyone who showed up. We are available again on the Dev Edmonton Slack. A lot of great other groups there. You can ask us questions. Me and Andrew and Chris are all there. And again, we're going to be doing this in November, the first Saturday of the month as usual. We are still looking for someone to give a talk. So if you got something you'd like to hear about, let us know, and we'll either give the talk ourselves or find someone to give it. Or if you got something you'd like to talk about yourself, please feel free to come up to us in the Slack or at YEGRB.com, our contact form, and let us know what you'd like. That is it for the October meetup, and see you again in a month.
Thanks, everyone.